So we want to welcome the Foreign Minister of the Republic of Poland, Radoslaw Sikorski, to our Future Diplomacy interview series. This is probably the 10th in a series of interviews that we are conducting with leading practitioners in foreign affairs. And we're very, very honored to have you on the Harvard Kennedy School campus this morning. And I want to start by asking you about innovation in foreign policy, and particularly about the changes that you introduced in the Polish Foreign Ministry when you assumed office. They were described as pretty sweeping, so I would like you to just sort of talk us through why you decided to really institute a number of changes in response to some of the global challenges that we're seeing now.
The changes have been structural, organizational, and technical. Structurally, I re-examined our posture around the world, and somewhat anticipating the economic crisis also, I reduced the number of Polish embassies and consulates by 20. It was a very interesting project because we discovered that some of the consulates or embassies were created to serve conditions that have not been around for decades, but bureaucratic inertia kept them going. And so thanks to the savings that we thus generated, I'm able to upgrade the physical infrastructure of our priority embassies. For example, we are building the most modern and the most expensive embassy building in our history in Brussels at the EU, which for us is more than an embassy. It's a sort of a permanent delegation of the Council of Ministers in Brussels, because the EU relationship affects all branches of our policy. But we are also opening up new consulate buildings in London, in Ukraine, in other places, and also giving some of our ambassadors proper residencies, moving embassies into office blocks, office buildings, and upgrading residences. On top of that, I have digitalized the ministry. When I came in, there was no central address book, and embassies had their web pages and their addresses on local servers. Now the ministry is run like a global corporation, so that I can, with one click, I can send a message to all ambassadors. And they can also do it amongst themselves. And we have done this both on an unclassified basis, and also we've given every employee a laptop that can be used for open communications and for secure communications. In addition, every embassy has been given a satellite phone, which is proving very useful right now when internet and communications go down around the Mediterranean Sea, which is helping, for example, in evacuation efforts and in serving our people. And we've made a number of organizational changes. For example, we've united two ministries. In the past, there was the Office for Integrating Poland into the EU. That's been incorporated into the Foreign Ministry. And I've also created a system of consultations with both the Presidential Chancery and the Cabinet Office and intelligence services, so that people, so that information flows more freely between the institutions. Essentially, I've included representatives of those bodies in the key councils of the Foreign Ministry, so that we now also in that respect act in a more organized fashion.
So you've mentioned the integration of Poland's ministry on EU integration into the foreign ministry, and of course one could argue that few countries have been as prepared to take on the European Council presidency as Poland. I think everyone is very aware of the fact that Poland's turn comes in the second half of this year. And that the Eastern Partnership is something that Poland has identified as a policy priority for the 6 months of its presidency. So can you talk us a little through your priorities and how you expect to overcome specific obstacles that still exist in building that into a really functional sort of policy priority?
The national rotating presidency of the EU is not what it used to be before the Lisbon Treaty. For example, prime ministers no longer chair the European Council, and foreign ministers no longer chair the Foreign Affairs Council, because there are permanent officials that do that. But sectoral ministers will still chair their councils, and I will act as deputy to High Representative Ashton. So it gives you influence rather than power to achieve priorities. So priorities have to be realistic. We feel that since Poland actually did not have a recession at all, even in 2009, we grew by 1.7%, while everybody else stagnated. Last year we were the second highest growing economy in Europe, and this year we'll be growing probably above 4% again. So we feel that our contribution can be to tell Europe, look, you can grow too, and the way to overcome malaise is to do more of the same, namely more Europe, opening up more areas of the European economy to competition, to the free market. So, for example, one of the things that we'll be pursuing would be completing the single market in the services area. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the Eastern Partnership, but of course we have to react to the momentous events in the Middle East. So we are more likely to be leading efforts to strengthen European EU's neighborhood policy so that it can be effective in the cause of democratization, both in the south and in the east, where we also have a dictatorship in Belarus and an undemocratic Russia.
So that brings me to two questions, really. Of course, when the protests in Egypt started, the immediate comparisons that people were making were, of course, to Solidarność, which you were involved in, and in fact left your country because of your engagement in that movement back in the 80s. Is that a justified comparison? And what, if anything, now that we're seeing how things are developing quite differently in other parts of the region, can the European Union, but specifically your country or now the international community, do to enforce that kind of the change that you would like to see, i.e. the democratization that you just mentioned?
Historical parallels are never perfect. In fact, if you want to look for comparisons with solidarity, I think Tunisia is closer than Egypt because you have strong trade unions there. The trouble with dictators is that they are usually very good at eliminating plausible alternatives to themselves. So we may, if you want to play historical parallels, this may be more 1848, where people rose up all over Europe in different causes and with different outcomes, and mostly failed actually, but that was the first stirrings of liberal political aspirations. And I think the Arab world still has a long way to go, and we should help them because events that we are witnessing have proven how unstable the apparent stability of autocracy is. And we should create institutions and procedures for supporting alternative leads that, come the revolution, have the immediate capacity to take responsibility for their country. Because the period of special politics, when people are in euphoria and everything is possible, or seems possible, is very short. Within a couple of months, people want results. And results will be good when you have people who know what to do. And we feel that we have something to offer because we carried out a successful transformation, both from dictatorship to democracy and from a basket case to a successful economy. And we still have the people who did it. So, and also remember that countries are usually reluctant to take the United States as an example because you operate on a different scale. You actually haven't had a revolution for a while. And they are much more likely to listen to advice from comparable countries. So we feel we have something to contribute. And I'm glad that Poland has made the case for democratization, even at times when here in the US it was a controversial term because it was shorthand for bombing Iraq. We think democratization is a good thing and doesn't necessarily have to be done by military means.
So then how, in a very practical way, are you going about that and identifying the groups together with the allies? And I'm sure this will be part of the conversations that you have with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton when you travel to Washington later in the week, of finding the right interlocutors and finding the right means to leverage your experience and the international community's interests in democratizing the region.
Well, the wave of upheaval actually started in Belarus in December, right on our border. And I'm very glad to say that Poland and the United States have worked very closely. We have increased our resources for helping free media and civil society in Belarus. And the United States responded very well, as did the EU. Together we gathered 87 million euros at a donors conference in Warsaw for Belarus on the 2nd of February, which shows that when Europe and the United States act together, we can achieve a lot, because that's a sum that will make a difference in Belarus. And I have proposed at the European level the creation, inspired, quite frankly, by the US example, of a European endowment for democracy. In other words, an institution that would, parallel to political efforts, have in its charge supporting the groups that create civil society in undemocratic countries, because never again should we be helpless, should we have no alternative than either the tyrant or the fanatic.
You spoke earlier about an undemocratic Russia, and President Komorowski has said that one way of potentially re-engaging Russia in the wider European project, but then also on an international stage, is the possible revival of the Weimar Triangle with Poland at the lead. What is your take on that, and do you think that that's truly functional? Or do you need to?
Weimar Triangle is an informal process of sharing views and consulting between Poland, France, and Germany, and we have met actually with Russia at the level of foreign ministers, but that has nothing to do with democratization, because that's deals a fortiori with the authorities of Russia, whoever they may be. But when I visit Moscow, I always meet with the opposition, just as I would in any other country. And I believe that Russian people also aspire to control their life, to control their politicians. They travel in tens of millions for the first time in their history. And I'm sure sooner or later this will affect the Russian political system too.
You're giving a talk at the Center for European Studies later this afternoon, controversially entitled perhaps about whether European security still matters to the United States. Would you like to give us a preview of what your views are on that, and particularly, I'm assuming part of it will revolve around the missile shield, but other things I'm sure will touch upon the changes that are taking place within NATO?
Well, I think even a few years ago, efforts by some Europeans to create stronger European defense were greeted with suspicion in the United States. That's no longer so because we are, both Europe and the United States, demographically and even economically comparatively weaker, and therefore we need each other. And I think we're at the stage where the United States will be delighted if Europe gets its act together, and even if it's if that means Europe is more cohesive, but it could be more capable in helping the United States when we agree to do something together. So Poland is spearheading efforts to strengthen Europe's security and defense policy, and I think this is in US interest too. We should be able to act in our own neighborhood because we cannot count on the United States always to be on hand to sort it out for us when you have global responsibilities in Afghanistan, in the Far East, and you probably cannot sustain a defense budget at the current levels for very much longer. So, so we need to marshal our resources, and we need to do some job sharing.
So that on the security aspect and the military aspect, but of course the European Union is in a very specific situation now with, you mentioned of course the High Representative and the more permanent structures following the Lisbon Treaty, and then of course there is the European External Action Service. Does Poland have specific hopes for that body and that organization in its sort of diplomatic reach going forward?
Well, the motto of the External Action Service, projecting Europe's values, was proposed by Poland, and the top echelon of the service, consisting of 4 people, comprises someone from my ministry. So we're quite glad that that the External Action Service is beginning to merge diplomatic cultures from all member states. And we believe that we can be more effective in diplomacy when we act together. We are much better represented in trade after we've literally given up our sovereignty and allowed the European Commission to represent us in negotiations with the United States or China. And the same goes for diplomacy. And then diplomacy needs to be backed up by force occasionally. So that's why we should strengthen our military capabilities. We've conducted, as Europe, 20 operations already. Poland took part in most of them. But they need to be better planned and coordinated.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Foreign Minister Sikorski, for spending this time with us this morning and with the Future of Diplomacy Project. We truly appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you.